Today we have with us here at Knoxville Public Library Hilma Forsberg Cooper and her brother Alan Forsberg, and they're going to chat with us about some of their childhood memories growing up here in the village of Knoxville during the late 1940s, early 1950s, as they recall things. And they have a number of stories to tell us. So with that, I'll go ahead and let you begin stories that you've thought of that you would like to share with us. Go ahead.
First of all, thank you, Ellen, for giving us the opportunity to share some of our experiences, some of our history, some of our life. And we're glad to be here to do it. And so with that, I will pass it on to Hilma and see what comes forth.
I thought you said your stories were going to come first.
No.
Well,
We're doing this.
well,
Hilma, would you start off by telling us some of your memories about your schools and the education that you had in Knoxville when you were a child, please?
Oh, kindergarten in a public school was not commonplace. But in Knoxville, after Gertrude Case retired from being the first grade teacher, she set up her own private kindergarten in a building near the Knoxville Fire Hall. It was actually across the street from that. Ultimately, it became the Pink Store before it was actually demolished. But she ran a morning kindergarten for town children. The tuition was $1 a week, and for that, besides getting the classroom experience, you got a drinker of milk and 3 Ritz crackers for snack. And I went for 2 years, except I cried a lot, according to my grandmother, and they kept me home then after a while from the first year. But the second year I went all the time. And I'm pretty sure, Alan, you went the next year with Judy. And I do distinctly remember about that if my older sister didn't cross me at the street, I turned around and went home, and nobody seemed to stop that. But I can visualize Gertrude Case tossing out her arms when she sang songs, and it was a lot of the same children that were in my first grade class after that. But that was the start of the education in my years. And then the school in Knoxville was for first grade through 12th grade, and I believe that possibly Savensville had 12th grade, but I don't remember whether Westfield did or not, but Knoxville did. And the classes had 25, 28 children in. The former Presbyterian Church was the location for grades 3, 4, this cafeteria and the home ec class, and I think maybe even the music class upstairs. Yes. That you would leave your classroom to go.
Mrs. Finley was the music teacher.
And in the actual high school building with the gymnasium, there were grades 1, 2, 4, and 5 on the main floor, and the high school had the upstairs, and the science department and the wood shop had the basement. And it was not what you could call improved. It was a pretty basic looking area. And when the consolidation later came along, and it was only a junior high school upstairs, we still used the basement for science and wood shop.
In response to the Gertrude Case kindergarten school, she was such a grand lady, and I was always pleased that when they came to build the new elementary school here in Knoxville, that they named it the Gertrude Case Elementary, because she loved kids and she was just very gracious and kind, fitting and proper of the occasion.
And that reminds me that report cards all those years had a lot of emphasis on deportment. I don't think that shows up on, perhaps cooperation shows up now, but not deportment. And the report cards were every 6 weeks. And if you did make the honor roll, you got a ticket to the free show, which was held in the Clark Theater in Westfield, perhaps because the Clark family was prominent in school board matters, and I think they felt it was a worthy support of education to reward honor roll with a free show ticket. Mom, Pa Kettle at home, and some of those other.
Yeah, but there's always an incentive or a prize, and it's no different today, you know. And it was a big deal to have a free show ticket.
It was a big deal. Parents in general didn't hover. What went on at school stayed in school pretty much until the report card came out. Parents didn't go to school to raise any sort of issue that I can remember. And well, even we had a different kind of background at school maybe, but the parents didn't go to check up on you, and they didn't go to check up on me. So
Probably should have.
They probably should have. They could have. I'm also thinking though of that gymnasium was the largest gathering space in the town, and it was used for events, activities, and maybe they were school sponsored, but the town participated. Remember the dances that the Queen of Hearts dance? It would be like, sorry, that would be like these days. Does the general public go to like an alumni dance or whatever the snowflake dance, whatever they call it at Connesque Valley High School? But in our time, all ages, clearly if we went, all ages were permitted, and it was always fun to see who won the King and Queen of Hearts and basketball games. Basketball.
I remember in school, and every time I go down to the gymnasium, to the community center today, the place just reeks of stories,
Yes.
of events, of our past and our history, and I'm sure it does for every people. In Friday afternoon, when in school, if you remember the fifth or sixth period, we all went to the gymnasium for Industry on Parade. They had because
movie.
It was post-war, and it was a movie, and it was about the industrial era of what we were in and the possibilities for the future, and it was educational. And I was always all my life, I've always thought back on those. I can't really remember one specific film, but it was there for you get a good education at the Knoxville school. And Industry on Parade was all part of it Friday.
So that was Friday afternoon.
Afternoon.
All the grades
everybody.
assembled?
Everybody could fit into the gym for the most part.
And Mr. Bartu was there, and he introduced, and another faculty member would run the projector. Sometimes it'd break down, sometimes it didn't work, and we had to go back to class. But for the most part, it was a very nice educational thing that...
Oh, interesting. So was there ever an introduction of like the NASA post-war
yes.
space program? Do you recall
we're
like
talking,
that? Or?
We're talking 48 to 52.
You know,
So,
there was a lot of steel industry, if I remember correctly, and just exactly how things were coming, because that's when things were made from it started with the ore and went on through and the products that,
Okay, so a changeover from the post-war where economy was all focused on the war effort to turning that prosperity elsewhere.
Yes.
Prosperity didn't really arrive until into the middle of the 50s. So this was still a period where the memories were raw, and the needs were there for tires and cars and machinery. And
she's on to it now.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Today, if you were going to have that, probably it would be about cyber, or it would be about many other things, the higher tech end of the future.
Right. So I know that there was a lot of automobile industry refocusing after the war? Because I believe there were stories of folks who had ordered a vehicle on the eve of the war and did not receive it until after the war, a year or two until those plants could retool. So there would have been a big automotive industry type of focus. Okay.
The basketball games, that was certainly winter entertainment, and I learned later on in my life how somewhat unique that gymnasium was. The out of bounds lines were at a minimum for this. It was just barely squeaking through being big enough to play. And the bleachers around the edge and the chairs were, the players were in your lap, kind of.
Yeah.
And I have met people now that are not from this school, but who were perhaps other places in the county, who played against the Knoxville high school team. And what an experience it was to play on that court. The other one that's that size is the upstairs of the Tioga Grange building that has a roller rink on the ground floor, and the Grange is upstairs. But the basketball court back in the day, and this was that time period and a little before that, was another one of the size of the one at the Knoxville school.
Okay.
Interesting to hear those stories.
Great memories of the people. I to see people, I see names, and I can visualize the whole thing. She gets the dances, and I can all the sports, the activities, who played center, who played guard, who got yelled at, who didn't. The referees, of course. I mean, how that goes even today. And they were local. Most of them from Elkland.
So did you kids play did you play?
No.
We were
Okay.
not
No.
athletes in that sense.
No,
Okay.
but we supported.
We supported.
We were cheerleaders,
And they
if you
were
will.
local celebrities, and the cheerleaders, the girls had the cheerleaders for role models, kind of, and the guys had the basketball players. And if anybody of a certain height, they became a basketball player.
Okay.
Not the Forsbergs.
So Hilma, you have some things to share with us about cultural life in Knoxville, beginning with the memories of the Starkeys. Can you please tell us about the Starkeys?
I would love to tell you about the Starkeys. Ultimately, Maurice Starkey was my piano teacher. But prior to those years, I started piano lessons with someone else. But they brought an opera workshop to the Connesqui Valley, in Knoxville in particular, several summers. And I remember the one where I was part of the little dance troupe. I was going into 4th grade, and I think that my grandparents thought it would be a good thing for Judy to do, and I must have pitched a fit because I ended up doing it with Judy. And I do think the opera was the Barber of Seville, but I could be wrong about that memory. At any rate, it was put on, and this little dance troupe that practiced for 2 weeks and had little costumes got to put on a show in the gymnasium on the stage. The Starkeys at that point were prominent in New York and New Jersey and Cohoes, New York, and for their music contribution and the opera. And it was quite a unique thing to have people like that. They're from Knoxville, we're from this area, so it was just coming back for their summers.
They lived in Knoxville, and their home had 2 grand pianos in the front room.
True. That
side
was
by side.
later years,
That's
right.
One for Mr. Starkey, one for Mrs. Starkey.
So I have a question. If you can elaborate a little bit, you referred to the fact that they were doing things in the larger cities, but they maintained a home here. Do you believe that they had 2 homes, or were they born and raised here? How was it that they came here?
They are relatives they were cousins, and they are relatives of Hugh Lugg. And I think that Maurice was born, Gene Seeley's the expert on this, but I think he's from the Mansfield area, born there. And I know Eleanor Starkey was actually born in the dormitory at Westchester College, because her mother was Dean of Women, I believe is how that went. and she had a career in voice and studio voice instruction, initially in New York City, but then in Cohoes, New York, which is right in the area of Albany. They came here summers during the time period we're talking about, when we were young folks. Then they retired, because I think Mr. Starkey was working, at the time of his retirement, he was working as the music director in the Cohoes schools. But when he retired, they decided to resettle back here, because they didn't have a large family, but the family they did have was back here. And the first place they rented, which was on North Water Street,
Yes,
up the street from us. It's in what we think of as the Fitch House. And then they actually bought the house between Hugh Lugg's house and the Drucker house, across from the old Presbyterian church.
I think it was the Martin House, if I remember.
I never had a name for it.
Sure. More recently, I believe Percy White is the name associated with that house, but I know the one you mean.
Okay.
Yes.
Well,
the Starkeys loved this area.
Okay.
And they saw opportunity in this Coneski Valley, and they enjoyed themselves.
They would do choir workshops as well, and that was initially that was a summer thing, and then I believe after the year they retired was the same year I graduated from high school and went to college. So I missed a lot of the day-to-day effect they had in the area. But it was your senior year, and Mr. Starkey continued as music director until about 1966, I think.
I think.
And
right.
she was a guidance counselor and directed the junior high portion of the chorus, whatever they call that. And then when he died in 1967, she went to Mansfield, and I believe she did a stint as Dean of Women.
Yes, she
there.
Did. Yes, she did.
But I started taking piano lessons from Mr. Starkey when they were still coming just in the summer. And the other teachers that I had gone on to other places, and as he used to say, well, I have you all summer, and then I have my students in Cohoes all winter, and I guess it works out. They had a lot of...
Mr. Starkey saw to it that I got invited to go to the district chorus in my senior year in high school. And it's a memory that I cherish, you know.
Okay, so where did you travel to for district chorus? Where was it held that year?
We went to Duke Center.
And help me out with where that is.
Between Eldred and Olean, really.
Oh, west of here.
South of Olean toward Bradford.
Okay.
Right.
So probably an hour and a half at least, right?
At least. Yeah.
Okay, and how many students do you think took part in district chorus that year?
Oh, golly. There was probably...
4, 6?
From our school.
Yeah.
4 or 6. But
Right, and the whole combined chorus
was probably 75 students from the greater Pennsylvania region that it encompassed.
Okay, very nice. I have a question that some other people might be interested in knowing before we go any further, and that is, you referred to Judy and piano lessons. If you could just set the context for us, if you could tell us your parents' names And your other siblings' names and how their ages played in with yours, because you will probably refer to them again and people might not know. So if you could just introduce your childhood family to us.
Go ahead, I'll take care of Judy.
Okay.
Our parents were Charles and Helen Forsberg. And Helen was in Edgecombe, which was an old Knoxville name. And Charles was from Elkland, and his parents had immigrated from Sweden in 1903. Our older sister, Mary, was born in 1939. I came along in 1942, and Alan and Judy were born in 1943.
And Judy and I were our twins. I think you've gathered that by now. And I was born first. Okay.
Oh,
always,
Twin A,
okay.
they always
Okay.
say.
Always
She
kind of
was twin
let her
A.
know that but Judy was, just one quick story about her is we went through 12 years of school together. Probably should have been separated, but that was not the way to do things in those days, you know. And more than once, you know, I'd be in the back of the class and she'd be up front, and she'd turn around and say, Alan, I'll tell Mother. And so we lived and died with that, if you will.
Right.
But some great years in growing up, and to have, as Hilma said, parents that were hard workers, and to live in this community.
Do you know if there were any other sets of twins that were close to your age in town? Because I can remember my mother saying she remembered your births, and she thought it was a very exciting thing. Everyone was talking about the Forsberg twins, as if it was somewhat unusual. Did you find there were any other twins during your era?
Yes.
Okay.
Henry and Doris Doan, the Doan twins.
Barbara Jean
and Mary Jane, and they were our age, of course, in the same school all the way through.
Okay.
And they were Deerfield folks, lived up on the Doan Road. And yes, and there was a set of twins, Gail and Galen Root from Westfield.
Paul and Leon Moore from Westfield.
And they were in our class. That's the third set was there. I think that was it.
Okay.
But yeah,
Thank you.
it was, yeah.
Okay. Can you tell us some memories about the Centennial Pageant in Knoxville in the year 1951? There were special things happening. Can you tell us about that?
I was the mascot for the Knoxville Fire Company, and I was in the pageant, and it was a gala event. The community was involved.
Community was
totally involved, and there are lots of stories and people were really appreciative of opportunities to have, to being part to celebrate this 100-year occasion. Probably how I got into being mascot of the fire company. I think our father was president of the fire company then, and he also was on the fire truck committee to buy a new truck with Ed Ike and Ed Jacobson, and those things probably. And then I was probably right around with him during these in and out, and probably they said, Alan, you'd make a good mascot for the Centennial, and so that I think is how that happened.
His siblings were jealous because he got to go to the practices and he had a costume, and the rest of us we were in the audience. I remember, though, specifically the costume part. I'm not sure where yours came from, but I remember the Dearman house across the street with its wonderful attic had trunks of old clothes. Now we would say that these are really items that should be in the museum, but I'm sure a lot of the costumes for the pageant came from there. And Kate Dearman and Marcia were both in the pageant. It was a really big year. I don't remember. I'm positive our father did not grow out a beard, But that was a common thing that was done during a centennial year.
Still, till today, it's popular
even
and bold to be part of that.
Yeah. It was 100 years was a long time to be a community. Now, of course, it goes by in a flash. But there were the parades. I don't remember the Knoxville Centennial Parade, anything specific about it. But I do remember other parades, particularly with Dad in the fire company, where all of the firemen had an actual uniform with the visor cap and just the paraphernalia that goes with a marching unit, and they would march as a unit. I don't think they had any kind of musical instruments with them, but there would be other bands and parades, and there would come now, of course, it's all fire trucks one after another. But
the merchants in town were all invited and asked to do their store windows in the old and the new. And I remember that Mike Hunter over here at the Atlantic gas station had a corn cob and a roll of toilet paper, and that was his window display Centennial Week.
And he had the Atlantic service station where the Citizens in Northern Bank
where the bank is today.
Okay.
But fitting and proper, and I mean, it was Centennial Week, and people were creative with their ideas and with their displays.
Just because it was such a big event all summer long in our childhood, he had the ice cream freezer with the popsicles and things. And I remember so many nights our grandfather handing out a quarter and saying, everybody go over. A quarter covered everyone back in those days. It would not just the 4 Forsberg children, but neighborhood kids too. But the thing that I wanted to mention, and that probably would never happen today, occasionally the power did go out in Knoxville in those days. And if that happened, the ice cream freezer, of course, went off. And he couldn't use that ice cream because we all knew that you would get very sick from refrozen ice cream. I think that's probably a truth. I'm not sure, but we were told you just can't eat.
We were raised with that concept.
Yes, and so all the children in town, the word just spread like wildfire. Go up to the gas station because they're going to give you the ice cream. They can't sell it.
Oh my goodness! So when the power went out, the line would form.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. So if you can repeat, what was the ice cream freezer like? What was it like?
It was chest type.
A chest freezer with basically
the flip
2
lids,
or 4
flip lids.
Okay.
And it was down. The ice cream things were down.
Okay, so it was coming by a truck from some other place.
Oh yeah.
It was a Seal Test or Dairy Lee or
Perry's or
whoever
whatever.
he carried.
Okay, all right. So
and it was not self-service day in and day out. If you asked for a fudgesicle, he reached down and got a fudgesicle or a popsicle.
So they weren't dipping it out of the containers. No. It was the pre-molded bars.
Yes.
Oh.
Klondike type.
Okay.
I think
they were called Eskimo pies in those days.
Okay, well, there's a cultural touch point right there. The Eskimo pie. Okay,
do you remember that?
I do. So, but in time, I suppose some other people might not. They just might not be able to put that together because we haven't seen that in a long time. So that's an important link I needed to know. And so the ice cream freezer, was it at Mike Hunter's or was it at the drugstore?
It was at the gas station.
It was at Mike Hunter's.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh.
The drugstore had ice cream for sure. They had a soda bar.
Okay.
But that ice cream was dipped out.
There was a soda bar at the Rexall store. So ice cream is very popular today. Stores you'll see freezer after freezer, and it was no different then. Yeah. And it was available just about any place, wasn't it, Hilma?
It was. Yeah.
So if I can ask a little bit more about the ice cream bar or the soda fountain, I have only seen them in a retrofitted touristy type of place. So there was one at the Rexall store, which was later called Cooper's? Cooper's store
Well,
at the
Cooper's
corner.
Rexall store before it moved over across the street.
Okay. And And there were many flavors of ice cream. Can you expand on what could you order there? What might you get if you went there? Were there counter stools and
chocolate
that kind
peanut
of thing?
butter sundae
Okay.
Was our family
was a family
favorite.
thing, and
Okay.
oftentimes the Cooper boys would work behind the counter, and they had to mix it up and get the peanut butter and get the chocolate the right mix, and the
Yes.
vanilla ice cream. That was very good. Chocolate malted milkshakes were very, very well. They were probably as expensive item as anything at the soda bar.
I would say there were only 3 flavors:
And
chocolate, vanilla, and
Banana
strawberry.
split. You could get a banana split with the 3 kinds.
How about a Dusty Miller? Do you remember a Dusty Miller?
Dusty Miller.
It was a dish of ice cream. These dishes, by the way, if they were sundaes, they cost $0.25, I think, 20 cents or 25 cents, something like that. But they weren't giant either. They were a scoop, a big scoop maybe, with the sauce on top. But the Dusty Miller was cocoa powder spread over the top of the ice cream, and it might be you might have it over the top of your chocolate sauce too.
Mhm.
But it I often laugh when I know there's a plant called a Dusty Miller, and I think that's not even close.
Okay, so if you were there, you could get the ice cream, but you also could get a prescription filled. Is
No
that correct?
prescription.
No, it was a Rexall, but it was a drugstore, so it was over the counter.
Home remedies.
Over the counter.
If you had
thing.
sinus
Okay.
and wanted an
So-
Alka-Seltzer
okay,
or something,
okay.
you could buy it
The
there.
pharmacies were Donnelly's in Elkland, and was it the Clark? Was it the Clark family?
Clark's.
Lenore Clark had the
There-
pharmacy in Westfield.
Yeah, the
So
Clarks.
there was a pharmacy or no?
No
in
pharmacy in
Knoxville?
Knoxville. No
Well,
pharmacy.
Knoxville did not have pharmaceutical, and Knoxville did not have movie. But I'll talk more about that later, but they had just about everything else. One parting comment on the soda bar, and I know that the beverage is still vogue today. They still like it, and that's the vanilla Coke.
Yes.
You could get them, not just a Coca-Cola, but you could get a vanilla Coke, and very popular at that soda bar.
Okay. Were they on tap or were they in the glass bottle?
They were on tap.
They were.
The vanilla came out of
a tube,
a pump, and the Coke came out of a dispenser.
Okay.
Right. And that reminding you, mentioning the bottles of things like Coke, soda, which was called pop and still is, I think, maybe around here, was very popular in those days, but it wasn't so widely available. And there was a bottling place up in Harrison Valley.
Mm-hmm.
I remember our mother saying that her grandfather used to, the beginning of every summer, he would go up to Harrison Valley and get crates, I guess it would come in, wooden boxes with 24 bottles or whatever, and he got a lot of it and would say, "This is my supply for the summer." But the mother and her brother could go over there anytime they wanted to and get a bottle of pop.
Okay, so I'm thinking of what I know as Harrison Valley Mineral Water Works.
It's part of
And
it.
we have a wooden crate that looks like
Sundrop.
it would have. Okay, so they were bottling water from a spring. I know that Earl Robbins was a salesman for it, but so you're saying that they were wholesaling or retailing other brands of
Birch
pop
beer.
as well through
Birch
that.
beer.
Birch beer.
I
So
forgot
Harrison,
that.
it was like an
Cola,
outlet
a
for.
cherry. Mhm.
And Sundrop was Sierra Mist today.
Like a lemon lime
like
carbonated
that, on that
thing?
order. Only.
Okay.
It was a
I was thinking of Mountain Dew.
Sundrop. Okay, so and I've always perceived that as something from the South. The brand name Sundrop. I did not know that was here.
in your
Interesting.
antiquing, I have never seen a Sundrop bottle. Okay, I always look for Schoonover's Dairy Milk bottles.
Mm-hmm.
I always look for Sundrop. Like Coke, Pepsi, they're a dime a dozen.
Right.
But the Sundrop bottles just went off the face of the earth.
Oh,
The
I like
birch beer that they had was clear, and I remember my first taste of it, and I did not like the tingle, tingle, tingle in my throat. I think it might have been several more years before I tried anything like that. I often think of when I see little children now with Coke, whether it's in a glass or a sippy cup or whatever. I think, do they like that feeling, that sting in their throats?
So the two of you have some Forsberg stories that are special to your family and traditions and memories. So if you could go ahead and tell us some of your Forsberg stories.
Yeah, I will start with that because just you can tell by the years that the years of our birth that we were all close together in age. So there were 4 young children, and our parents had the escape hatch of having our grandparents next door, and I think that both Mother and Dad would say that was a good thing because it took 4 people to raise 4 children. But one of the things that I think was particular to us when we were quite small in the wintertime, because these walks the walks I'm thinking of right now took place after dark, so it had to be in the wintertime. But Dad would gather the 4 of us after supper, as we called it, before bed, and take us down. We didn't go down Main Street. We went down the alley that's by our house to Fred Birch's barn, which a stone's throw from where we're sitting right now. And he was milking cows morning and night. And we would go into the milking parlor. He would have his radio on, which it continued to play, but obviously our dad liked to have a chat with Fred. And we kids would walk up and down and try not to step in anything we shouldn't step in, and marvel at how dark it was, and oh my goodness, the smells. It was, and we did this throughout our childhood. And when I look at the model, I think of the barn that's there, and the memory of that. From there, we would often go up Fred Birch's lane to Main Street, and that came out right across from Joe Moore's radio repair shop. And Joe Moore was high tech for the late 40s and the early 50s. He had a television set in there. That picture was terrible, but television, that was like, this is going to really be something. And again, he and Dad would have a chat. We did this long enough that television did come to Knoxville, and I remember being in there watching an Arthur Godfrey show on one of the first color televisions that was certainly the first one that was in Knoxville. Now, if I'm still walking with my dad, we're talking in probably the mid-50s by this time, and color TV didn't become part of the mainstream for quite a few years after that. But he had one, and Arthur Godfrey was even talking about what it was like to broadcast in color and how you couldn't wear a white shirt because it would glare too much. And then from there, we would walk back up Main Street and head over home. But meanwhile, our mother had gotten about an hour of peace and quiet, maybe.
You know, Hilma, you mentioned to me, and it pricked my memory on the time that when TV first came to Knoxville. I don't know, was it maybe in 52? Somewhere in 53? 52.
Well, 52.
52 is a good point of reference, I think.
I think perhaps.
Anyway, Mr. Schoonover saw to it that cable TV was coming to Knoxville, and on the edge of town, he was the first to get it at his home, just above Clinton Wood's garage. And he and our grandfather were very good friends, and so Granddad saw to it that every Saturday at noon, us 4 kids would get in his car, and we went up to the Schoonover house and watched the Big Top Circus.
Sponsored by Seal Test.
Seal Test.
And I think M&M's joined in after a while.
And it was from Saturday from 12 to 1. And this was our very first, at least for me, of TV that came to Knoxville, and eventually it worked its way all through town and got to all the homes.
The unique thing about that television was it was crystal clear. Yes, it was black and white, but we had visited our dad's sister in Rochester a few years before that, and she had one of those 9-inch screens that the TV, when it first came to Knoxville on a weekday, it didn't start until 4 o'clock in the afternoon either. It was, you didn't have midnight television 24 hours a day. But the TV up at our Aunt Christine's house in Rochester was so snowy that not only was it a tiny little screen, but you couldn't really see anything. So it was hard to imagine this was ever going to be anything any better. To go to the probably 14-inch screen at Mr. Schoonover's and see just as if you were looking at a black and white movie. No interference, and that was what was so wonderful about the cable. The cable systems in those days were not really the same thing as cable today. It came down off Forks Hill in coaxial cable from a tower, and then it was wired around the town, and of course there was a membership in a TV association to be a part of it. There was no way to you couldn't do it with an aerial or an antenna or anything. But there were times when we would have the snowy picture, and the common word around town was, Joe's working on the line again, because it was the same Joe Moore, high-tech Joe Moore, that was the maintainer.
He was the maintenance guy. Yeah. He knew.
He was the one who knew how to do it.
So, a question for you about that first antenna. You said it was near Forks Hill.
It was at the top.
At the top of Forks Hill.
As you come up the river and see Forks Hill.
Was that property leased by, and what was Mr. Schoonover's first name? Height. So, and he had the farm down on the flat where the Smiths maybe are now. So, do you think the association leased the top of that hill?
I think it was his property.
You think it was his property? Okay.
Yeah.
So then, and did it look like a grid or a satellite, or what did it look like?
Like just a tower, a metal
tripod, a triangle tower, I think, as I remember. Not like a fire tower, but you could climb. There were steps.
You climb up to it.
And you could, and it had a red light on top.
I don't think it had anything like a dish.
It brought in the signal.
Okay, and then from there, the town had to be wired for it. Do you think that most people, do you remember that it was a big topic of conversation? Who has TV? When am I getting it? Was it within a year that most everybody had it?
No,
or 2
and
years?
It took a while.
It took a while, and even the Forsbergs. The Forsbergs didn't get it until I was in 7th grade, for sure.
A couple of years
that's about
later.
4 years later.
After our grandparents had it.
Yeah, and of course, every evening we were over at our grandparents' house watching. And the very first night they had it, I remember Grandma saying to Mother, "Well, have the kids come over because there is I Love Lucy and Claudia were the 2 shows that were on." And she said, "I understand they are very good shows." Well, who knew from anything? So from then on, I believe Lucy might have been on it at 9 and Claudia at 9:30, or possibly 8 and 8:30. It could have been that way. But soon we discovered there was a news show that started at at 7:30. Doris, what's her name?
Doris Day?
No, not Doris Day. Who sang?
She was a friend of
Chevrolet was the sponsor, and she.
So you discovered good ways to extend your viewing
We
evening. There was a reason to go early and stay late, right?
15 minutes of watching the music show, and then 15 minutes of John Cameron Swayze's news show.
Okay.
But Sunday evening, the Ed Sullivan Hour came in, and everybody always, that was the trend of what was happening in New York or Broadway and on the West Coast, and it was the latest and the greatest.
Okay.
The Saturday night Gunsmoke with James Arness, and that everybody liked that.
Well, and the hit parade, everybody liked the hit parade.
And came into baseball, and afternoon games were sponsored by Gillette, and it just boomerang. TV then was just like it is today. It was good. It was high priced, and very much needed. And I mean, they talk about the automobile revolutionizing the country, and even the internet, but television did its share.
The television took, people had their entertainment in their homes.
Our grandmother had her day shows that she watched.
After a while, there were day
as
shows.
the world turns, and she would expound on them, and there was something for everybody.
Remember the TV Ranch Club that started at 5 o'clock?
We watched The Lone Ranger.
That was live from Binghamton. This TV was live, by the way.
Lone Ranger and Gene Autry and Roy Rogers and all of those.
So was there ever a time, may I ask, if your parents came to the point where they found it necessary to regulate your TV watching, or was it all the point where it was all just fine and good, and the regulating of TV was again another way that your parents
some folks, Ellen, would mute the TV if the beer advertisements came on. I remember that they were kind of sensitive to the teetotalers were kind of sensitive to those viewings, and of course that's where the money was, and they could afford to advertise. It's the same today, they take the lead.
Oh, how interesting!
Controlling screen time though was not like it is today, because when we were a vulnerable age, the TV was at our grandparents'. Yeah. So I mean that's part of it. If you had homework, and let's face it, there wasn't right, and if you had homework when you were in 7th or 8th grade, or I mean there wasn't any homework prior to that anyway. This was just entertainment in the evening.
So the idea of controlling screen time really came much later. Did that apply to you?
If you had 3 channels, you had ABC, CBS, and
NBC?
And a different show, and it always was kind of, I wanted to watch my show, and somebody else was sitting in somebody else's chair.
So how did that work? Because that still plays out now with who has the remote. So was there discussion or debate?
Initially there was only one channel. It started with Binghamton.
But it was pretty much agreed upon ahead of time. We will watch Gunsmoke tonight.
Yeah, because there really wasn't, for several years, there wasn't any choice. And heavens, Ellen, there was no remote. You know that. So we did in our family, though, we had a little disagreement about seating. Because once television came to the Forsberg house, the seating, there were some chairs that were more comfortable for watching television than others. And there was, if you got up to go get a drink of water, someone took your seat, unless you said, what did you say?
Put a lease on
You put a lease on your chair.
Right.
And if you said those words, that meant somebody could not take that chair while you were getting
somebody would walk in the room and, there's an empty chair. So-and-so has a lease on that.
Okay, so it was important to make your disclaimer when you left it, because otherwise it could be taken.
Absolutely.
Oh my goodness. So, that
life was good.
Yeah.
In our grandparents' house, we children were all lined up on the floor, and we each had a pillow that we put down and put our arms on, and we just watched it this way.
Right, and when you're little, you can do that. It doesn't work as well when you hit a certain age. Alan, you have some more things that you have to share with us about Knoxville back in the day. Go ahead.
Thank you, Alan, for providing this opportunity to share some of these experiences. Today I would like to mention some of the things that not only were experienced by the residents and the local inhabitants of this community, but also those from the farming area of Deerfield and the surrounding area. Knoxville residents living here every day could walk to the post office. They were seen going to a given grocery store. We had 3, 4. You had Lugs, you had the Red and White, you had Market Basket, and the lower store. And people could walk to any store, get provisions for the day. I mean, people would go to the store every day that lived here, and they go to the post office and get their mail. And that was from the library to the post office, from Billings Park to the bank. People participated in various places along the way, okay, because they lived here. So today I'd like to mention to you folks about a farm family, the farmer and his wife, who made the list at home and who came to town once a week. And their day to come to Knoxville was Tuesday. And as you both know, Tuesday was sale barn day, where you could go to the sale barn, fight through the blue air, and listen to the auctioneer, and you could buy, and you could sell, and you could trade, and you could swap, and you could visit with people and see people. And the merchants in town just loved Tuesday because it brought people to town. There were cars on side streets parked everywhere, and it's sale day. And the sale barn was one place that maybe the mister would go to, and the missus could say, well, now I have errands to run, okay? She might say, you know, the car needs inspected. I'm going to go to the local filling station and get it done. She might say it needs serviced. You take care of the oil, lube, and the filter. They could, in season, get the snow tires on. It was always that day in November. We talked about November 11th was the drop dead date. Everybody had snow tires for their cars. And Tuesday, you could make the appointment and do these things. You know, the grocery list could be filled at any number of stores. There were 4, as we mentioned earlier. And I mentioned Lugs because their store was so unique. It was a department store, and they sold groceries, ready-to-wear clothing, okay, and yard goods, fabric. And that was because the home ec was taught in schools in those days, and people sewed and they mended, and they could come to Lugs and buy their fabric. Of course, my wife does all of that stuff with quilts today, and she knows all about yard goods, and so I have to mention the fact that it was a real viable thing.
It was a real viable thing. I'll pitch in my 2 cents too.
So maybe the Mr. and the Mrs., if he got his business done at the sale barn, they often could eat lunch there, or they could go to one of the other local restaurants. Even go to Schoonover's restaurant down at the lower end of town. They could
through hardwares
get a lemon drop ice cream cone. Okay, so maybe one had an appointment. Professionally, there were services here in this town. You could get things done. Maybe she had a tooth that wasn't just right. And she could get that scheduled and go to Dr. Lee. And Dr. Lee could pull that sucker, or he could fill it. Okay. Could go to Dr. Lewis. He had hours from 1 to 3 in the afternoon. Maybe somebody need a physical. maybe a child needed the vaccination. Oftentimes, these needs, I mean, when I think of my health today, our health today, we're alive today because of Dr. Lewis. And he would see to it that these things could be scheduled, and as a part of the errands of a given Tuesday, they could get these things taken care of. Dr. Sagers, if you had, he had the veterinarian clinic, of course, and provided veterinarian service for the whole area around here. And it later became a Northern Care Clinic with Dr. Bush. Okay. So, and then the other professional service was maybe on their list was, you know, we'd like to make out a will, or we'd like to sell some property. So we could go to Attorney Glover, and he could see to it that all the legal matters were taken care of and everything was all set, so that could happen, and it all could be done. And as I mentioned earlier, the town folk had access to this every day, but the farming community might not only come once a week. In summers, I think they came a little more frequently, but in the winter, it might be 2 weeks. Okay. So we move on to the First National Bank. And Mr. Farmer or Mrs. Farmer or whoever would be the case who did the banking said we need to go and see if we can get a loan at the bank. And they want to put an addition on the barn. They'd like to build a new home, maybe a new silo. And they're going to go to Edgecombs and they're going to spec it out and see what we need. And of course the bank in those days would know who you are, yep, know who you are, know where you've been, know what you're, all this sort of thing. And okay, we'll get back to you. So they head to Edgecombs, and they go in there, and Roy and Ivan wait on trade, and they get to these people, and they spec out their needs and about what it's going to cost. And right in the middle of the conversation, it's the First National Bank calling Edgecombs, saying, is so-and-so there? Yes, we're working with them now. Spec out this addition they want to put on their home. Just give them anything they want. No problem at all. A handshake did it, and the people are elated, and they go on, and they leave that day, and they not only got some of these other things done, but they all the banking and all of the construction in Edgecombs have the material, or we'll get it, and we'll get it to us, and we can go ahead and get a carpenter and go to work. I mean, try and do that today. You need building codes. You need so many things that are different even to get the materials, which is really. Hilma mentioned that we do have 2 hardwares in town, and in seasonal seasons that these people would come to town, fishing supplies and fishing gear was available. Hunting supplies and gear, ammunition, guns were available. Maybe if it was a summer day and they were in town, maybe they wanted a gallon of paint. Gonna paint, spruce something up. Well, you could take care of it. You just go in, you could get it, get the color you want, and shake it up, and send you on your way. And one of my favorite stories too here is the 2 feed stores, because we serve the farming community. The 2 feed mills, farmers would come with a grist, and you know what a grist is, Hilma. They would bring that in, their grain, their oats or their wheat, and the people at the mill would mix and grind molasses into it and other vitamins that they would bring. And it would go home like it came in bags, only it would be feed, cow feed. And I just think it's the great story of the farming community having a product, bringing it here, and having it converted into something usable. Okay. The Rexall store, we mentioned that earlier, and that was home remedies and the soda bar, and we talked about
comic books.
Yes, comic books and magazines. And so now, today, and these people that are visiting town on this Tuesday, it might be time for lunch. And lunch was always available at the sale barn. They had the best hamburgers up there, apple pie. Local people that cooked were there one day a week, and it took care. And it was a busy place. The sale barn had a kind of a little bit of a bunk room where truck drivers could go sit and rest and catch their breath until they went out with a load of cattle. There was a provision, of course, for them to eat. It was just a great place for meeting people and getting. Perhaps she needed to get her hair done. Okay, perhaps I'm going to town Tuesday in the afternoon. The beauty parlor's open. They can see me at 2:00. Gets her hair done and trimmed, or he needs a haircut. You know,
2 barbershops.
Just the way that all unfolds, you know, on a given day in a given town for people to get things done in this town. And I always talk about our town being all encompassing, with the exception of pharmaceuticals and movies. You can get anything you want. There was a corner furniture store over here, and the furniture store sold sofas, chairs, it sold mattresses, vacuum cleaners, and you could go in there and you buy a present for somebody. You know, have it laid away for Christmas, or at the holidays, take it with you. A brand new sofa and a nice recliner, right from a store in Knoxville. I can't really remember the name of it. Drew Buffington had it, and
then Plank. It was Plank's later
of our era. It
Yeah,
was before that. But nonetheless, the store was there, and they could. Maybe it was time to say it with flowers. They could go to Buffard's. Okay, maybe it was a funeral, and maybe it was a time to honor someone, or do something in memory, or put a vase of flowers in a church, or maybe buy your perennials. Okay, you could go right to Buffard's greenhouse and take care of all of that on a day visit. Obviously, you can't do all these things at once. You know, I think you're getting the drift of that.
It would take several Tuesdays to do this.
The example, nonetheless, is,
Right.
you know, in a nutshell, of what the service in churches. Knoxville had a Methodist church. It had a Baptist church, an Assembly of God church. There were service organizations, the Masons, the OES, Boy Scouts, and Girl Scouts of America.
My grandfather was in the Odd Fellows.
Odd Fellows I never knew much about, but they were one of them.
Yeah.
They were one of them. The Boy Scouts Little League was popular in Knoxville in the spring and summer. You know, they had interest, and they had children, and they had boys that came through. The fire company had an active line of officers and volunteers. They were ready to always help out when they were called. The VFW took care of the veterans and supported many community and functions as well. Memorial Day, July 4th, Christmas season, and Sunday afternoons were some of those events that were highlighted as significant in Knoxville. In the evening, in town, the barber shops were open. In the evening, the Rexall store was open, and these were places that were gathering places. You could go and you could experience what was happening around town. All stores were open on Friday evening.
The library was open on Friday evening.
And all stores were closed Wednesday afternoon. I always knew the library to be open on Saturdays. I never knew too much about it during the week, but if you'd have to come to town on a Saturday for the library, or Friday evening, because don't come on a Wednesday afternoon, because things are sealed up tighter than a drum. Okay. So Knoxville and the farming community were all aware of national events, okay? This included everything from the World Series to Did You Get Your Deer, or to when Harry Truman fired MacArthur. in the Pacific in 1952. Newspapers, the Saturday Evening Post, Life magazine, even Ladies' Home Journal were all available for the town folks. Okay. AM and FM radio was available, and TV came in the early 1950s. Okay. Knoxville was not a Teflon-coated town. It was a bedroom community. Some 24 people worked at the Valley Tanneries. Untold others drove to the cities for work. Today, Knoxville remains just that. Today, a nice town to live in and raise children. Finally, Knoxville was served by 2 railroads. And daily, the daily freight came into town in the morning and back in the afternoon, and thus enabled Knoxville to serve its people very well during the 50s.
So this is for either of you or both of you. The Valley Livestock Market, the sale barn, as you have memories of it. If you were a town kid or a country kid, what kinds of animals might you see there being sold or brought in to be sold? And did you ever buy a pet there, or did you ever buy animals? Someone mentioned rabbits for the summer or for a short-term project. What kinds of things were you attracted to as kids to watch as animals at the sale barn?
I'll take that part of it. When I used to go with my father to up there, and he'd be visiting with people, and I'd be bored because I didn't know what they were talking about, I would go out back, and it was kind of an elevated kind of a walkway that you could go out and look over the whole yard where there were pens. Okay, I enjoyed watching the calves, you know, in a given pen, or the cows, or the bull, you know. There were very few horses, as I remember it. There were some goats, okay, that came through, some sheep that came through. But I would go out there, and it looked like, to a little boy, that back pen area looked like a Chicago stockyard. I mean, it was big. But as far as buying, did we ever?
No,
You never bought
didn't.
an accidental rabbit or an accidental goat and brought him home?
People were there. People were there, Ellen, above and beyond the sale barn, selling wares such as apples. Dad might pick up a bag of apples, and you know, but that was about where it began and ended. But you go just to see the people and smell the blue air and listen to the auctioneer, you know, and if you itch your eye, you might buy something.
I don't remember anything about wandering around the yards like you. I sat in my seat because I was intimidated, and the only animals I remember, not even calves, I remember the large-sized cows or steers or whatever, and walking, how they would walk around this. Even to a child, the pen where they were walked around was rather small, and I remember the song of the auctioneer and the description of this animal.
Right.
In terms of buying animals, and I'm not sure any money really changed hands about this, but we would get rabbits from Mr. Flint up near the Purina Mill.
Yeah. Leland's father.
Leland Flint's father. And he would tell us what they needed to eat and show us in the grass what we could pick. Plantain sticks with me, and we would keep them all summer long.
You know, I have to tell you this about, you probably knew this, Hilma, about the sale barn, but you mentioned somewhere along the line that everybody's yard was a playground.
Oh,
well,
yeah,
the sale barn, totally off limits, was only open one day a week. But every once in a while, us boys would get together.
Because us girls did not
and we would
participate.
play cowboy and Indians in the sale barn. and it was an all-day event. You could hide in those calf chutes, and you could hide there and there, and those gates were so darn tall, you'd get caught because it took forever to get over them. And Mother we'd get home and she'd say, "Where you been all day, Alan?" She knew where we'd been because the whole town seemed like all our friends. Everybody gathered for a day of cowboy and Indians in the sale barn.
Interesting. Someone else began to tell a story similar to that when they saw the sale barn on the model, next door on the model. And according to this fellow, they would play in there and they would jump across the pens from the tops of the wooden partitions, and they were running, chasing, whatever, each other, I think.
Yes.
I'm sure they wouldn't have probably tolerated that when there were livestock there to be agitated or upset, but he was telling about some games that they would play, chase each other in the empty barn. There were no adults, and no one seemed to really know they were in there, and they were just running wild and jumping across the tops of the
apparently it was
pens.
easy to get into.
That whole end was open.
Okay, it was
Very
open. It was
interesting.
open area.
And
interesting.
this is one of those days that I mentioned earlier about Teachers Institute.
Oh yes.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
The planning, you know how today with cell phones, you can have a party and get on the cell phone button and there'd be 50 people there in 5 minutes. Well, this was one of those events that was planned, and we would meet, and it didn't bother anybody. We had an awful lot of fun.
Toward the end of October would be the Teachers
Okay.
Institute, and to the Thursday, Friday.
Never-
off
So it
of
was a
school.
built-in 4-day weekend that you could count on.
We
Yes.
never got yelled at. We never got arrested.
Okay.
But I mean, I think it's private property. I think it was then. And but it's that fun to play.
The whole town was the playground,
Yes, it
though,
was.
because there was just none of this supervision that we provided to our own children. We're not so far removed that I think we knew what kind of deviltry we could get into, and so didn't want to offer the same opportunities to our own kids. But back in our childhood, children just had the creek, the river, the fields, except everyone was very respectful of rattlesnakes. You just didn't roam them.
The side hill was playground. It was all free territory.
So I have a question about, you had referred to at some point about the swimming hole and playing on the trestle, and playing on the trestle even when the train ran on it.
Oh, yes.
So you just listened or watched
Yes.
and warned your
Yeah.
friends, and you
Yeah.
were jumping off the trestle
Well, we
into
jumped
the
off
water
the trestle,
hole
but
below?
we could also stay. There were concrete
Abutments
that you could stand on when
they
the train
protruded
went
out.
by.
They were wider than the actual bridge, and
So-
there were kind of, I don't know how to describe the side rail of a bridge
Well,
rail,
I've
and you
seen
could just
it-
back your body right into it
Okay.
and stand there. Of course, it shook, it vibrated, and everything.
So you just warned each other. If someone heard the train coming, he would have to blow the whistle at that point, right?
Yep.
So he'd be blowing his whistle when he came through there,
Yes.
and you'd hear it well in advance,
They
and
knew
then
we
you'd
were
all
on the
just
bridge.
scramble.
They knew we were on the bridge. That's
Right.
a good way to put it too.
So you'd just scramble to these abutments, or
Yeah.
you'd jump in the water or whatever, and to someone from my era, that's just unbelievable
Some
that you were
adults-
allowed to play
Some
there,
adults
but,
that swam there,
um,
and of course we were the younger, but the adults that went to the swimming hole would jump and dive off of those abutments. Now there was one deep end. It was about 9 feet, so it was safe. And the water ran in and the water ran out. That was the key. You couldn't go swimming unless the water was running in and running out.
So that was in Troops Creek,
Troops
and
Creek.
your parents were very specific that there wasn't to be stagnant water. So during
That's right.
times of drought, did it get dry and the water got
Dry.
slow, then you weren't to swim, or how was that working out?
Sometimes I remember that there was a no swim season because there'd been a storm in a gravel bar. It filled that baby up,
Okay.
and I don't know whether somebody went in there and opened it up for us or what. But because you think shift, in creek beds and
Yeah.
river beds, as evidenced this last summer. And it was no different in the swimming hole. You take a 9-foot hole, it didn't take much to fill it. And that would kind of put the kibosh to a summer season. I think that happened once or twice.
Okay.
Wait, you know, I'm just thinking, I personally couldn't swim during all this time I was up there, and I don't know that you could either. And we were not, honestly, Ellen, we were not supervised. There was something of a, well, certainly there had to be drowning accidents. I don't want to, but I think there was a certain respect for the situation we were in terms of, well, this is water, and if you can't swim, you stay where you can touch bottom. That's all. You don't put yourself into the deep part. I personally never jumped off the abutment.
I never did either.
But we have a cousin who's blind, and she was just about our age, between you and me, I think. Carolyn, yeah, and she jumped off.
Okay, I don't remember her going over there to swim.
Yeah, they one Sunday afternoon probably when
Came
they were
over.
visiting us.
They were
She and her
Corning
two
folks,
brothers,
weren't
and
they?
they were Corning people, and all of us were up there, and
Huh.
Carolyn said, "Just help me get up there," and she jumped, and more than once, I'll have to say. It was such fun.
But it was a community thing. It wasn't just Forsbergs that swam. You know, adults and kids, and it started in 10:30 in the morning, and it would go right into dark. Somebody be using the swimming hole.
This swimming pool that in our really young years, there were two more or less available to us, both required a drive. The first one was at Brookland over in the Ulysses area, where the very attractive little church is. There was someone with an in-ground regular pool. I have no idea if it cost anything to go, but our dad really did like to swim. Mother couldn't swim. Dad liked to swim, and I remember going there on more than one occasion in the summertime.
Hilma, I think that pool was affiliated with that home
That he took us through.
And that home was for children from New York City that were troubled, that came out on the train, and they went over there for rehabilitation.
That would make sense.
And they had their own little fire department.
Yeah.
In the pool. I think that was part of the recreation.
Okay.
We go by there, and I still,
Remember that.
Brook Hall or something. It sits back. It's very well shrubed, landscaped, and it's a beautiful place.
The other one, and I remember going with the Dearmans here more than my dad or our dad, but over in Wellsboro in Woodland Park. And I had lived in Wellsboro for 10 years after we first moved back here in 2000, before I located where that pool was that I remembered so vividly.
Mm-hmm.
And it's long gone, and of course they have Packer Pool and Packer Park right in the
Mm-hmm.
center of
It's still a
town.
park, isn't it?
Yes, it's
Woodlawn Park, but there's
Woodlawn
no,
Park is
no
still
pool.
there. There hasn't been a pool for a long time.
Pools are hard to keep.
In fact, it was probably gone by the time we were
Regulations.
around 11 or 12.
Mm-hmm.
I could swim, I know, when one time I went there because they had a 3-meter board and I jumped off it. So obviously I had to be able to swim to do that.
Interesting. Oh,
It was quite exciting the day I realized that this is where the pool used to be. The fireworks in the valley were set up on the hill behind the what's
School.
now the community center. Yeah, and my memory of the fireworks goes back so far that I know I was held on somebody's lap and I would cry because I didn't like the noise. And I'm reminded of that with my own grandchildren sitting on my lap over at what's the name of the lake? Over by Wellsboro, with how happy they were with all the sound, and I can still remember how unhappy I was.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that was the fireworks was the 4th of July celebration around here for years. And then you know, it's moved different. We, because of where our house was located, that dirt road we called it, but a cinder road that went along the WAG depot down to behind the school. That was how they let the traffic out of the parking lot, which was the ball field.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure some people were able to get their cars turned around and go back out to Main Street directly, but the organized way out was to come right up what amounts to an alley that was next to our house, and we used to watch this. And I'll have to say that I still, whenever I'm in a crowd of traffic that's from some event being let out, whether it's in the Philadelphia area or closer to here, that's what I remember. Is sometimes we even tried to count the cars because it
stirred up a lot of dirt.
It stirred up a lot of dirt.
Dust.
True too. Now it's called Railroad Avenue and it's a real road, but in those days it was.
Mother used to make sure the town got up there with salt the week before, and salt that road because it would, you know, make it. Salt creates the moisture,
right, and keep that down. So speaking of Railroad Avenue and the side hill, someone had mentioned rattlesnakes a few minutes ago.
Yeah,
so if I could just ask you, did you ever see one? Did anyone ever call your attention to one? Did you see a dead one? What was your experience as town kids with the fact that people talked about them and that they were maybe there?
Our father mowed our property to within an inch of its life. And the reason was, if you have your property mowed, you have a little bit of a chance against a rattlesnake. They're not going to come over. And the railroad was considered to be a detriment, a preventative really,
right,
but
a barrier.
Just on the other side of the station, just on the other side of the railroad, we know that the woman we called Mammy Schoonover had rattlesnakes in her wash tubs hanging on her back porch, and when she wanted to get the wash tub down to use for any purpose, she had to bang it with a stick first and snakes would come out. And our dad had strawberries planted in the lower end of our property. And I never picked strawberries, but what I'm sure I heard the rattle of snakes.
So
I never saw
Did you tap
one.
the ground and listen? Or did you see them?
No.
Or did you just know that Mammy Schoonover had them?
Oh, she told us.
She told you?
Oh, yes.
Did she show you ever?
Oh, yeah. Yes, I have seen rattlesnakes, both dead and alive.
Okay.
Her line was, I think that's documented maybe in the museum, but Mammy's line was, they won't hurt you.
Yeah, they won't hurt you. Yeah.
But I don't ever remember Ellen ever seeing a live snake, and my footprints are all over this town and these hills. And I never remember ever stepping or hearing it, but I've seen some dead ones. And somebody come up behind me with the rattles and shake them, and how you jump because you knew the sound. But no.
Dad used to say though that is why he mowed, because when I was a really small child, I remember how high the grass was out behind our house, and as soon as he was, I think, the first person in town to have a power lawnmower. It was red. I remember we had to pick up sticks before he mowed. But he then just mowed and hay, or really wasn't hayed so much as it was high grass. That got mowed down. But we were not allowed to be up on the hill when in rattlesnake season, which was a lot of any warm weather time.
June, July,
August. We started going up after a frost probably, and to get the hickory
October
nuts.
hunting season, it was
And it was safe.
Okay. Very interesting.
And the property that that your mother grew up on, we all knew was safe from rattlesnakes. And the story there was, it was the other side of the river. On the other hand, Dick Keltz had plenty of rattlesnakes over on his property, which was the other side of the river.